Good evening. Thank you all so much for being here and for watching from wherever you may be in the world. As this is a fireside chat of sorts, I'd like to give you an idea of my orientation and positionality as it relates to this session, and Nicole will do the same. My name is Dr. Erin Perry. I am the editor-in-chief of Outlier Media in Detroit, Michigan, in the United States. I have been in that role for about 6 months now. Prior to that, I was the managing editor for a little over 3 years. And I have worked in several newsrooms. One of them, the longest stint, was actually where I met Nicole at the Detroit Free Press. And there I was a copy editor, I was a reporter, but I think that my greatest legacy at the Detroit Free Press is being the director of the high school journalism program. So it was the largest scholastic journalism program of its kind in the state. And that story is kind of full circle for me because I was once a student in that program and returned years later to actually direct it. I stayed at the Free Press for 6 years. The only reason that I left is because my husband is an automotive engineer, and he had a professional opportunity that moved us to Salvador in Bahia, Brazil. We returned to Michigan for a few years, and then we moved to Mexico, Chihuahua specifically, for a few years. And once I returned back to Michigan in earnest, I started a PhD program and completed that program last year, a little bit over a year ago. I also have journalism and teaching degrees from Hampton University, which is an historically Black college in the state of Virginia. I have a teaching degree from the University of Michigan in Dearborn, and I have the doctoral degree from Wayne State University. Now, Outlier is approaching its 9th year. It was founded by Sarah Alvarez, who is in the audience today. Thank you so much for being here. But we are an organization that is centered on filling Detroiters' needs. So whatever it is that the residents of Detroiters tell us are their greatest challenges, that is how we frame our coverage. So we don't sit around a table as a group of journalists and just decide what the agenda will be. We survey Detroiters regularly. We are in conversation with Detroiters regularly so that they can then let us know what it is that we should be focusing on. And primarily that deals with housing and utilities and government accountability and anything that they have identified as a longstanding problem in the city where people proximate to power need to be paying closer attention to those issues. Nicole will introduce herself next. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for gathering, and for those of you watching remotely. My name is Nicole Avery Nichols, and I am the editor and vice president of the Detroit Free Press, which is a 193-year-old newspaper in the United States, in the state of Michigan. I hail from Long Island, which is a suburb of New York. My parents are from Alabama, which is in the very deep South in the United States. They grew up at a time of segregation. I'm a Generation X journalist, and what that means and how that's important to this conversation is that I remember when the first email addresses were introduced in the newsroom. I remember when we first got online in the newsroom. So I was subject to and witness of tremendous change in our profession. How I got into journalism was really about my roots. I come from a family of storytellers and from a culture where story was often passed down orally because we were often not written about, right, or part of the mainstream narrative. So it was really curious to me as someone who studied English at Tuskegee University, which is also an HBCU, and then went on to study journalism at Syracuse University, SI Newhouse School of Mass Communications. It's curious to me to look at, had been curious to me to look at the mainstream narrative and understand that that was just part of the story. So for the last 30 years, it really was about elevating the voices of the underrepresented for me and making sure that newsrooms were a place of representation, not only for readers, but also for diverse bodies of journalists.
Thank you. Now, Nicole has already mentioned that the Detroit Free Press is 193 years old. Outlier is about to turn 9. But still, it's still pretty historic, and unfortunately, we have to say that in 2025, for Black women to be at the helms of news organizations. So can you talk a little bit about what that means to you both personally and professionally to have achieved that?
Sure. I am the first Black woman to helm the Detroit Free Press, not the first woman, not the first Black person, but the first Black woman. And that's something that you would think is not a surprise, right? However, it's still extremely significant when you think about nearly 200 years. Right, nearly 200 years. Our newsroom recently experienced a couple of moves. We actually had to move our newsroom, and I came across an envelope, a very thick envelope of Free Press leadership, and all of these wonderful black and white photographs of editors, managing editors, city editors, et cetera, from the past. And just thumbing through those pictures, not really seeing myself, seeing Bob Magruder, who's the first Black editor, it really became apparent to me how significant my lens would be, particularly to the city of Detroit, Metro Detroit, and Michigan in an election year and at a time of tremendous change. So that is, it's something that I go to, events, and people actually squeal when they see me or when they're introduced to me. They squeeze my hand, that church squeeze. My staff really takes pains to make sure I am fortified as a leader, because they know that in some instances, there are times when I'm not afforded some of the grace and some of the deference that previous leaders have received by virtue of who I am in the world and how people perceive that. A staff member of mine recently, and this box from Amazon came at a time when I really, really needed it, sent me a megaphone. I wanted to bring it, but I knew it wasn't a good idea to pack a megaphone in my luggage. But just the notion of elevating voice is something and being inclusive is something that's very present for all of us.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, I think you would agree that Detroiters and anyone, they are the best storytellers of their story, right? Which is why it's important for us to show up in those communities, as you've already explained. So that makes perfect sense.
Absolutely. So, Erin, the Free Press tells the story, is the paper of record. We tell, business stories, politics, lifestyle stories. We're known for our automotive coverage, podcasts, films, documentary films, et cetera. Outlier specifically tells stories related to Detroiters.
They do.
As you mentioned, Detroit is well-known, global influence. When you're telling stories that specifically relate to Detroiters, how do you make sure that the message spreads beyond that finite audience?
Well, thank you for that. We are a hyper-local organization, so we will always start with Detroiters. Again, we don't determine what the coverage is. We talk to them, constant conversation with them, surveying them, buying them coffee once a month just to be in community with them so that we can then figure out what their greatest challenges are, what they tell us their greatest challenges are. But in a more formalized way, we partner with researchers at the University of Michigan, where we actually survey a much wider sample of Detroiters than we would be able to just be in conversation with meeting every day. And so what those surveys tell us is, how we need to how we need to show up in our coverage, right? And so when you listen to the people who are right there, then you present the coverage as they have told you it is important to them. That's how you can then identify what the important story about Detroit is. So we do less of trying to figure out how to localize national and global stories in a way that fits Detroiters, and just the opposite of that. Somewhat we focus on what they say, so that that story that's right here is then the message that is sent out, globally and nationally. So we reverse the order a little bit. Our leaders have said, Detroiters are our assignment editors, right? And so we are hell bent on listening to the things that they say. Yeah. So how do you all do that, though? Do you, as a newsroom, how do you combat like the narratives that come out of Detroit that may not actually be what's happening there, because you have outsiders who kind of parachute in to try to tell the stories about Detroit versus getting the stories from the people themselves?
Yeah, I think that because we have such a long-standing history of trust and we cover the full sphere, we really are traditional in our approach to make sure that we are connecting the dots for people, constantly batting down disinformation, misinformation, rumor, etc. It really is about when you're this sort of storied brand, it really is about continuing to earn the trust of your readers, and that requires us to be really, really transparent. To when we make a mistake, to make sure we're correcting it, to give folks a sneak peek into our process. When it's an evolving story, if it's a breaking news story in Detroit, to let readers know this story is evolving. When we add a photograph, when we add a video, making sure that we're letting readers know this story has been updated in order to really hold on to that trust and let folks have a glimpse into what our process is. Most people don't know a journalist, right? They have no idea about our process, our integrity, the rules around it, our training, etc. So really, at times like this, it's up to us to be transparent, to hustle, to admit when we make mistakes or miscategorize, etc. And also, going back to where you started, Erin, to be plugged in to community and have those conversations. Take the time in a digital era where everything is running fast and we're pursuing the algorithm, right? The free press reaches millions of folks every day, right? Really take the time to step off that hamster wheel, connect with people, right? Do the sourcing in order to encourage those relationships and that engagement.
I'm really glad that you mentioned this idea of corrections and clarifications and updates. We have this conversation a lot in our newsroom. I feel like Outlier's levels of transparency are so high that we are often, and this isn't a shot at our credibility or anything like that, but we are very transparent when we do update a story. And we are very clear and specific about what in that story was updated. We updated this story to reflect whatever the issue is. And we are doing that obviously for transparency issues, but we just want to make sure that we are consistently earning the trust of our readers. And so the other thing that you mentioned was about the algorithm, right? We use a harm matrix at Outlier to kind of determine, in addition to speaking with folks on a regular basis, this harm matrix that says if there is an acute amount of harm to a small group of people, that is something that we would cover. So for example, if there are issues in the juvenile jail, right? We have partnered with the Free Press to make sure that we are paying attention to those issues. If there is a small amount of harm to a larger group of Detroiters, of course we're paying attention to that, tax foreclosures and things of that nature. But it's less important for us to be first, more often than not, right? We understand that if a story is harmful today, it will be harmful tomorrow.
Right.
And so we want to make sure that we do our due diligence to make sure that we are fully reporting that story, that we're fully capturing all the voices that we can in that story so that we can tell the complete story. But I was sitting here, I'll say this and then we can keep going. I received a text message from our enterprise editor, Sarah Hewlett, today, and one of the stories that we wrote right around April 8th, I think, was about what people who are green card holders should expect, when traveling, things that they should do, things that they should keep in mind. I'm pleased to say that just a few minutes ago, she said that story from Brianna Rice, a reporter at Outlier, that story had more than 165,000 page views for a local, news organization, right? And that came out of what are the things that we should be paying attention to. And that story stemmed from, at least part of it, I would say, from just things that we're hearing being a border town, for a lack of a better term here. So, less chasing of the algorithm for us and doing the things that we know will have the greatest impact for our readers.
Absolutely. And I think that our motto, not necessarily first, we don't want to be last, but we want to be accurate.
Right.
We want to be correct. Yeah. We want to be trusted. And I love that we both intersect in the space of service journalism.
Absolutely.
The story you just mentioned is something that is of service, right? Those of you who watched Cory Booker, right? Record 24 hours on the floor in the legislature in the United States. One of the stories that he read at 2 a.m. in the morning was a story by Susan Tompour related to Social Security, really, and about folks in their angst around what will happen to their Social Security payments. So the notion of connecting with things that really impact everyday people, pulling that out of the news, finding ways not just about the policy, but how does policy live out here in the world? So one question, Erin.
Sure.
We talk a lot now in the newsroom about advocacy journalism, right? I talk about people first to the staff and making sure that we're centering people. You are community centering at Outlier. So talk to me a little bit about advocacy and where the line is for Outlier.
I carry a pen writing instrument with me that says, we're not neutral, we are on the side of the traitors. First person who comes up to me after this panel and asks me for this pen, it's a really good pen, I will give that pen to you. We have lots around the newsroom, but whatever it is that gets detroiters more information that can allow them to live their lives in a greater capacity is what we will do. The more things that call people to the carpet who are close to power and making these decisions every day that affect Detroiters' lives is what has our attention. So we work in service of that every day. If you want to call that advocacy, fine. We're okay with that. We advocate for the things that we believe Detroiters deserve. And it seems so, these are basic needs, right? Everyone should be able to have access to information. They should be able to have access to how the government is spending money, why they spent it this way, whether a candidate kept their promises that they made on the campaign trail. We should be able to have access to that information. And what's unfortunate about journalists even having to exist, so this is a little risky for me to say, I guess, but the bad part is that it takes us and that journalistic muscle in order to get people the answers that they should have anyway. Yeah. Why is it that, they don't get answers until the media comes knocking. And so while I am grateful, to be a part of this profession, sometimes I find it a shame that we have to exist and push and push and push to get the things that Detroiters should just have anyway.
Absolutely. It's an honor.
Yeah. So we have entered now a second Trump presidency. How do you anticipate the free press's shift in like the priorities as it relates to political coverage.
Okay. So we mentioned earlier that Detroit is right on the border of Canada. So we have that. We have an international border. Our city is majority African American, 70+% at this point. We have in one of our suburbs one of the largest populations of Arab Americans, folks from the Middle East. So we have a lot of issues. We have international students at the University of Michigan. We are the home of the auto industry where tariffs impact. So what we've done is restructure our newsroom to make sure that we're capturing the impact on all of these segments of our communities. We want to make sure that our communities thrive, but we also want to make sure that we're connecting the dots for people. Tariffs are coming. What does that mean? Visas are under attack. What does that mean? There's a shift in immigration policy. What does that mean? The war in Gaza, what does that mean? So we have actually assigned reporters to things like higher education, to things like resistance or protest. We have assigned reporters to also trans youth. We're making sure that we're looking at the underrepresented folks and folks who might not be seen oftentimes by mainstream media. So what we've done is reorganize our newsroom to make sure that we are hitting the hot spots and making sure that we're capturing the fullest and most diverse variety of voices in our daily report.
It's really important work. I think we have about 5 minutes left, 4.5 minutes here left for questions from the audience, if there are any.
Hi, thank you. First of all, I love how you blend in with the chair color.
Oh, thank you. I was concerned about that yesterday.
That's cool. I'm from a student's newspaper from a German university, Kassel. Nobody heard of it, but doesn't matter.
You've heard of it. That matters.
That's right.
So in Germany, when I read about Detroit, it's a lot about poverty and drugs and consumerism. So I wondered, in your news, how you treat it, especially with regard to compassion fatigue, and if you have some takeaway pieces of advice how to treat this in my city, for example, because this is a topic I'm usually very interested. That was the question, and then I wanted to ask if I can take dibs on the Detroit pin.
Yes. Yes. We might have a few others around with us. I don't know if you have any, Sarah, but yes, it goes to you. Do you want to take that?
Yes, we can share it because we're chomping at the bit here. In terms of poverty, yes, we have some challenges, right? In the city of Detroit, outer ring suburbs, et cetera. But this is a place of tremendous history, tremendous resilience, vibe, style, all of the things, right? Sports teams, industry. If you look at the story of Detroit, where it's been from bankruptcy to now, it really is about a story of resilience. The thing that's really important is that you see that not just in the narrative, but also in the people. Right? The train station, the Michigan Central, which was at one point, it's a huge train station where folks actually came from the South to the North. World War II soldiers went through this particular train station. It's been renovated by the Ford Motor Company. If you look at that now, and think about where it's been, it really, really typifies what the city has been through. Yes, there are challenges, but the fact that that narrative is something that lives you is something that I'm charged with making sure that we as journalists combat.
I'll focus on the second part of that question. What works at Outlier may not necessarily work for the Detroit Free Press. It may not necessarily work for your student news organization. And so I'm going back to starting with the people. You have to ask them. You have to talk to them to figure out what it is that is important to them, and not just feel like you can decide, because you are the one who is sitting behind the pillar, as we call it, or sitting, in the ivory tower. So I would encourage you to do some surveying and talk to your audiences to figure out what it is that they need. You also mentioned compassion fatigue. If I'm understanding that correctly, we at Outlier, we have really we have about 1 minute left here. We have really generous policies in terms of making sure that our team does not get even remotely close to burnout, right? And so I think it's important for journalism leaders to make sure that they are taking care of their team. So whether that is, just putting policies into place that make sure that they're not traumatized by the very things that they are covering, or that you're not paying attention to the trauma that may come out of them covering whatever it is that may be happening. So just don't forget to pay attention to your team as they're continuing to do this work, that you should be asking others how you should be doing this work.
Read freep.com. Subscribe for a full picture of what Detroit is really about, and outliermedia.org. Outliermedia.org is where we are, and also on all socials. Thank you all so much.